Tim, Anton from Climatalist.
Hey,
Thank you for having a quick chat with us. So, clean energy finance, not clean energy, sorry. Climate energy finance.
I jinxed you.
You jinxed me. Tim, tell us about your company.
So I work on the mobilising capital at the speed and scale required to solve for the energy crisis. So I work in the energy market, so hence I work on finance, energy and climate, put it in the other way, CEF, climate, energy, finance. So we are specialists in the area of finance. So there are a lot of people working on climate, huge amount of scientists, a lot of environmental groups, but my area of expertise is financial markets. For my sins, I was managing director, head of research at Citi, which at the time was the biggest bank in the world. So I'm trying to leverage the financial knowledge that I've got, because what I did find when I was in finance was I actually never met an environmentalist. I never read an environmental report. Now that I worked in the environmental space for 10 years, there's lots of brilliant people in that area, very passionate, but what I made the observation that if they're writing brilliant reports and no one in finance is reading them, when we're not getting the message through. So long-winded way of saying we've got to actually speak in a language that finance can understand.
And your business in particular, how are you helping business finance to deploy capital, or is it policy based?
Yeah, it moves all around the place. So we don't have any particular agenda. It's opportunistic. So 2 years ago, I worked on rolling the AGL board. Now, AGL is the biggest polluter in Australia, and like 40 million tonnes a year of carbon emissions, and an absolute Luddite, uninformed board that was actually destroying a whole lot of value. Now, Mike Cannon-Brookes came in, bought an equity stake. I worked alongside Mike with 10 other brilliant people from finance, and we actually helped roll the board. A lot of the big super funds want to do the right thing. They actually do want to walk the walk, but they talk the talk, they need to walk it. But they were very uncomfortable with the idea of backing a billionaire who hadn't disclosed what his agenda was, where he only spoke for 11% of the market. So we got in and talked to them and said, well, this is what we understand the strategy to be. Now, I wasn't working at the time for Mike Cannon-Brookes or with him or even talking to them. But what we gave the investors the confidence to say, well, anyone's better than the current chair, anyone's better than the CEO. Let's actually put in a new board and get them to elect a new CEO so that they can actually correct it. Now, all of a sudden, AGL, 2 years later, the share price is double where it was, and it's actually now a slow mover in the right direction as opposed to a dinosaur moving in the wrong direction. So a long-winded story, but that was one intervention. That was very specifically about using my finance connections to get them to understand what an alternative strategy for AGL could look like, where AGL becomes part of the solution. And so AGL is now building wind farms, it's building solar projects, it's building batteries, and it's trying to close coal-fired power plants quickly in an economically rational way. So they become part of the solution.
So you're kind of a takeover baron without being a takeover baron.
Well, no, definitely not. We don't have any capital, and we do no paid advisory work.
Got it.
So we work just in what we consider to be the public interest. So it's a privilege that I actually can do that. But at the end of the day, how do you take a company, one of the people we put onto the board said, I asked her why she was doing it, and her comment was, there are 4,000 employees in that company. That company could well go bankrupt under the incumbent Luddites running it. 4,000 jobs lost and a whole lot of market power just wasted. So let's reorient it, give it the leadership it deserved, and now all of a sudden it's moving in the right direction. Now, I say it was moving slowly in the right direction. I want it to move twice as fast. So we still rib them a bit and try and encourage them, but it's about actually getting the right people in place to actually drive the agenda that we all collectively need. So that's about talking to finance, the big asset owners, the asset managers, the banks, and offshore, onshore, and then trying to actually talk to the policy. So when you're rolling one of the biggest energy companies in Australia, that had political implications. So it was ironic when I was talking to the federal government, they go, the last thing you want us is helping you. We're the kiss of death, so we'll just stand by and let you do what you're going to do because we endorse the strategy. It's in the public interest. Now, it's a real privilege to be able to actually say, I am actually only representing what I think is in the national interest. No one in finance can say that because they're all conflicted. They've all got the profit orientation. So I'm sort of, if you like, buying back my soul, but I'm actually trying to actually create the right framework to mobilise capital, because we need a huge, I was going to swear, but I won't, we need a truckload of capital, like $4-5 trillion a year globally.
Yep.
That money totally exists. It just needs the right policy framework.
And the right go-to-market, right? Because there is so I've been out talking to startups in small-scale hydrogen, in critical minerals, and the capacity or the lack of capacity of existing institutional investors to deploy capital to these new opportunities, or even a bank to finance a green loan to transition a residential property. Like these products don't exist. The risk weighting in the finance sector doesn't seem to exist.
That's right. And so that's where I also work on policy, because without the right policy, the banks can't mobilise. They want to. I actually talk to the major banks every day. They want to do it. But if there's no price signal, if there's no policy framework, then they can't crowd in their capital. Put it the other way, if the federal government creates the right policy framework, or the state governments create it, get out of the way, because the capital will come. But ultimately, we've got a political problem. Carbon pricing is toxic in Australia. And so how do we actually solve for the climate crisis without a price on carbon? We end up resorting on 4th, 5th, 6th rate solutions because we can't take the obvious one. That's the one that would mobilise capital tomorrow at unbelievable scale.
And do you think it's at all tenable?
I've sort of shifted, not politically in Australia. No, the Murdoch press has absolutely polluted most Australians, so the climate is toxic. There's so much division and fear of the future, fear of change. But at the end of the day, I work more on international markets where the opportunity for Australia to be a world leader is huge. We need a price on carbon. So I mentioned the idea of a North Asia carbon border adjustment mechanism. I was talking to the Chinese government a couple of months ago, and they said, we hate the EU CBAM. And I go, actually, I think you need to reorient. If you replicated the EU CBAM, that would be the best thing that Australia could ever have. I go, hang on, that would hurt Australia. I go, no, it wouldn't. It would create the right
drive, the right signal.
Our biggest customer in the world sends the signal that our biggest companies need. BHP and Rio need that price. Fortescue's doing it without the price signal. So much as Twiggy is very divisive, he is absolutely passionate about the climate science and trying to drive solutions. But we need BHP and Rio backing him in. Instead, they're saying, but there's no price signal. We're not ready to move. He can do it. He's a billionaire. It's his private capital. But at the end of the day, we need all of them mucking in. We need them actually collaborating, and they need to collaborate with China, Japan, Korea, our 3 biggest customers.
So that was an interesting idea that you floated. Our 3 big mining players in Australia collaborating, anti-competitive. What would the ACCC say about that?
You need the rules changed. So actually we do need, and that's why I have been working with the federal government a little bit, and we are seeing Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, reorienting the Foreign Investment Review Board. Now, at the end of the day, we need to collaborate with our customers. We can't compete with our customers. We need to work with them. And so the idea that BHP works with China, with Japan, with Korea, but better still, BHP, Rio and Fortescue. So at the end of the day, it's about changing the way we define capitalism to say that's not anti-competitive. Well, anti-competitive, it's about Australia actually solving the bigger problem, which is climate, or actually creating the capital market signal to actually solve for climate. So that's a top priority for the government. They write the rules. The role of government should be to create the right rules that give us the solutions we need, then get out of the way and let the market solve for it. But at the moment, we're saying, let's tie the market's hands behind its back, no price signal, and go and solve the problem. Well, how? They can't. And so that's why, coming back to your first question, why I focus quite a lot now on policy. If we have the right government policy, we can mobilise the finance, and we can mobilise literally hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
So there were a lot of mentions in your panel discussion around the US Inflation Reduction Act and the amazing thrust of innovation that's led to in the US. What could we do here that's remotely similar?
Yeah, it's interesting. Prime Minister Albanese said, but Australia's a small country. We can't just replicate the US. We can't replicate it. We don't have $1 trillion.
We have $3 trillion locked up in super.
We have 3.5, 3.6, 3.7 trillion. Absolutely. So we have the money. And that's why there is no concern about the money, but we also need to do a uniquely Australian one. So I'm hoping Treasurer Chalmers in the budget is going to provide the context to future Made in Australia and actually provide a uniquely Australian solution. America is the biggest economic market in the world, the domestic market. They've got 300 million Americans. They're a huge economy. We're not. We're an export leader. But that doesn't mean we're not a major player. We're the number one in iron ore, number one in coking coal, number one in exports of lithium. In international commodity markets, we play number one.
Yeah.
So it's about actually doing a uniquely Australian response to the US Inflation Reduction Act that recognises Australia's role is very different to America, fortunately. But we live in the Asian century, we live in the Asian time zone, and all of our trade partners are in Greater Asia. So it's about collaborating with China, not fighting with them. It's about collaborating with our big customers.
So on that point of collaborating versus made in Australia, so we talk about made in Australia manufacturing. One of the speakers on the panel said that our R&D spend in Australia is the lowest in the OECD, or among the lowest in the OECD. Do we have the horsepower to make Australia work?
Yeah, I really wanted to respond to that Catherine's point there. She's dead right, but I would argue the fossil fuel, she specifically said Australia is very low in the OECD, but the energy sector is the lowest of any sector in the world.
Wow.
The fossil fuel sector, the fossil fuel energy companies pay next to nothing on R&D, invest next to nothing on R&D. And that's what really gives me inspiration and hope. Why? Because the Chinese companies are not like the Australian or American or European fossil fuel companies. BYD spent $8.3 billion US on research and development last year. 100,000 workers working on research and development, one company in China. And that's more than their entire net profit for the year was spent on R&D. That's another way, 6.5% of revenue last year was invested in R&D. Most fossil fuel companies, their spend is a 10th or a 20th of that.
Wow.
So China leads the world. So coming back to your point, can Australia catch China's spend? No. I mean, we'd need to give ARENA $100 billion. Now, that's not going to happen. It would. If I was treasurer for a day, I'd give them that money and say, let's go and actually invest in technology. But what we do have the privilege of doing is working with our number one trade partner, because that number one trade partner is China. Their solar module companies invest 6, 7, 8% of revenue every year in R&D. Let's partner with them. So rather than SunDrive, which is going to be most likely the beneficiary of $1 billion of solar sunshot money from our taxpayer funding, but it would be about spending $1 billion of Australian money to deploy technology in Australia, world-leading technology, make in Australia, so we build a 1 gigawatt solar module factory, but do it in partnership with a Chinese firm. Why? Because that Chinese firm is 100 times bigger than SunDrive would ever be, but they have the best technology, they have the best engineers, they have the road to market, and they will keep the company, use it as access to Australia. They'll take the best technology in the world from University of New South Wales. So Professor Martin Green, Professor Renata Regan, those guys have spent the last 40 years building the best solar technology in the world. Let's actually partner with China, because China is the best manufacturer of solar in the world. Take our technology, their manufacturing, put it together. That's SunDrive.
Requires a lot of trust.
Well, yes and no. It requires SunDrive to really choose one partner in China. You're not partnering with the Chinese government. So Treasurer Chalmers made it very clear that his Foreign Investment Review Board considerations will bias towards private companies worldwide, not state-owned enterprises. He specifically never mentioned China, which is sensible, because Australians on average have a fear of China thanks to Murdoch. But I think we need to remember they're our number one trade partner, trade customer.
It's got to go in two directions.
It's got to go both ways, and we've got to rebuild a bit of trust. So let's partner with the number one or number two or number three solar companies in the world all of them are Chinese, keep going down, number 4, number 5, number 6. So SunDrive could pick any one of them, take their technology and license it to that Chinese company. And then all of a sudden you've got a win-win for the Chinese company. For our company, they effectively get access to Professor Martin Green. They're happy, we're happy. We've got a manufacturing facility in Australia. We've got a little bit of reindustrialisation of our economy. We start to reskill our workforce. I walked around... Prime the pump and learn by doing. And you walk around the SunDrive facility out at Cornell, they're using advanced robotics. Like, how many facilities in Australia have the best robotics in the world? And China's got it, Korea's got it. Unless we partner with them, we'll never catch them. So let's get the best in the world as a partner.
I guess this is what the US is doing with elements of the Inflation Reduction Act, even with battery tech and so on. They are bringing in Chinese partners.
Yes and no. Unfortunately, America is really, really fueling a trade war with China. So that's why everything I talk about is Australia charting our own road.
Goldilocks.
We can play with both. We're a military ally with America for good or bad. I think it's bad, but we are. And we're also number 1 trade partner to China. Let's actually work with both, and let's not get involved in the US-China trade war. Like overnight, Biden's just announced yet more massive tariffs on electric vehicle BYD exports. Now, that means BYD costs are now priced out of the American market. Who's the loser in all of that? It's not BYD a little bit, but they'll just sell it to Chile or to Brazil or Indonesia or Europe or Australia. It's actually the American consumer. They're not going to have access to the best technology in the world, Chinese, and they're going to pay a higher price. So,
changing tack, just to close out. You said that you managed to do your work without having a profit motive. How do you do that? How's your organisation funded? Asking the obvious question.
No, it's actually the first question whenever I talk to anyone in finance. Follow the money. We're funded 100% by philanthropy, Australian philanthropy, and so we actually are in a really privileged position.
Very well.
And I was on the commitments committee at Citi for a decade, and so we were evaluating every deal we're working on. We had conflicts of interest everywhere. In this role, I've only got one agenda, which is the public interest. So it is a real privilege, and that comes from philanthropic funding, which means I can actually, when people hear me talk, they know I might be wrong, but at least I'm not paid to do it. Well, it might be an error, but yeah, I'm honestly wrong, as opposed to I'm just pushing the barrow. And that's why I hate the fossil fuel industry. They are so divisive, and they bribe politicians all the time. They donate to our politicians, our 2 big political parties. I really see that as an undermining of our democracy, because our politicians are paid to actually act in the self-interest of fossil fuel companies who are busy destroying the planet. So
yeah, it's an interesting exercise. We could talk about that for hours. Thank you so much, Tim.
No problem. Thank you.